The resignation letter felt like a lead weight in the pocket of her tailored blazer. Eleanor Vance smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from the pale gray silk, her fingers trembling only slightly. She had rehearsed this moment for weeks, in the shower, during her morning commute, in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her. Yet now, standing before the floor-to-ceiling window of her boss's corner office, the city of London sprawled out like a glittering, indifferent beast below. The words seemed to evaporate from her mind, leaving only a hollow echo. The office was a testament to the man who inhabited it. All sharp angles, polished chrome and dark walnut. A curated collection of modern art, all aggressive lines and bold colors, splashed across the walls. It was a space designed for power and precision, for multi-million-pound deals and ruthless decisions. It was the antithesis of Eleanor, who was all soft curves, quiet efficiency, and the warm, organized chaos of a dozen different colored tabs in a filing system only she understood. "The projections for the Singapore merger are on your desk, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice betraying none of the internal storm. "I've highlighted the key clauses you need to review before the video conference with their legal team at 3. I've also rescheduled your lunch with the investors from the Guardian Fund to next Tuesday as requested." Alexander Thorne didn't look up from his screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a man carved from the same granite as his desk, sharp jawline, dark hair peppered with distinguished gray at the temples, eyes the color of a stormy sea. At 38, he carried the weight of a global investment firm on his broad shoulders with an unnerving ease that both intimidated and, Eleanor had to admit, fascinated those around him. "Good. And the flowers for my mother's anniversary? Did you send them?" he asked, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the spacious room. "A bouquet of her favorite white peonies was delivered to her home in Chelsea an hour ago. The card, as you dictated, is signed from her ever-dutiful son, Dad." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was one of the few humanizing rituals she'd witnessed in her 5 years as his executive assistant. The great Alexander Thorne, feared in boardrooms across the city, still remembered his mother's anniversary. He finally glanced up, his gaze sharp, missing nothing. "You're efficient as always, Eleanor. Is there anything else?" This was it. The moment of impact. She drew a steadying breath, the air cool in her lungs. "Yes, sir. There is." She stepped forward, the click of her heels on the polished concrete floor unnaturally loud. She placed the crisp, white envelope on the immaculate surface of his desk, right in the center, precisely aligned with the edge. It was a gesture so quintessentially her, ordered, considerate, flawless. "My resignation," she said, the words hanging in the air between them, simple and devastating. "I'm giving 4 weeks' notice as per my contract, to ensure a smooth transition." The silence that followed was profound. The distant hum of the city faded into nothingness. Alexander stared at the envelope as if it were a foreign object, a bomb that had somehow materialized in his sanctum. His fingers, which had been poised over his keyboard, stilled completely. "Resignation?" he repeated, the word tasting alien on his tongue. He leaned back in his leather throne, steepling his fingers. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cool professionalism, but a tiny muscle twitched in his jaw. "This is unexpected. Is there a problem? Has Sterling Capital made you a better offer? I will match it. Name your price." It was the Alexander Thorne solution. Throw money at the problem until it disappeared. For 5 years, it had worked on disgruntled partners, rival firms, and dissatisfied clients. But Eleanor was none of those things. She was the foundation upon which his professional life was built, and he had only just realized she was made of something far more valuable than money. "It's not about money, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And it's not another firm. It's a personal pursuit." "A personal pursuit," he echoed, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal genuine bewilderment. "What personal pursuit could possibly warrant leaving a career you've excelled at for half a decade?" She met his gaze squarely, her own hazel eyes calm and resolute. This was the part she had practiced the most. "I've been accepted into a program. A master's in architectural conservation. At the University of Edinburgh." Alexander blinked. He actually blinked. Of all the things he might have expected, corporate espionage, a rival's poaching, a family crisis, this was not on the list. Architecture? Conservation? It sounded like a hobby, a frivolous pastime, not a reason to abandon a trajectory that he had, perhaps arrogantly, assumed ran parallel to his own. "Architecture," he stated flatly. "You're leaving Thorne Investments to go and look at old buildings." A flicker of annoyance crossed Eleanor's face, quickly suppressed. "To study them. to preserve them. It's what I've always wanted to do. I put it on hold after university to pay the bills. But I can't put it on hold forever. The truth, unspoken, hung heavily in the air. She had put it on hold for this job. For him. For the relentless, all-consuming pace of life as Alexander Thorne's right hand. The 60-hour weeks, the last-minute trips to New York, the constant state of alertness. It had drained her, but it had also paid off her student loans and built a healthy savings account. The account that was now her ticket to freedom. Alexander stood up, turning his back to her to look out at the city. His posture was rigid. I see. He was silent for a long moment, processing. The emptiness he felt was immediate and startling. It wasn't just the inconvenience of finding a new assistant, a task he dreaded. It was a sudden, chilling premonition of the silence that would occupy the space where her quiet presence had been. The absence of her knowing exactly how he took his coffee, black, 1 sugar, but only with the Ethiopian blend, the way she could anticipate his needs before he voiced them, the calm efficiency with which she managed the storm of his life. Very well, he said, his voice clipped, returning to the safety of business. 4 weeks. You will, of course, train your replacement. HR will send up candidates for you to screen. Dismissed. The word was a dismissal of her dreams, of the 5 years of her life she had given him. It stung, but she had expected nothing less. She nodded, a sharp, professional dip of her chin. Of course, Mr. Thorne. She turned and walked out of his office, her spine straight, the lead weight in her pocket now transferred to the pit of her stomach. The first step was taken. The world hadn't ended. But as she closed the heavy oak door behind her, she felt the first faint tremors of the earthquake her departure would cause in the small, meticulously ordered world they had built together. The next 4 weeks were a masterclass in surrealism. Alexander was, if possible, more demanding than usual. He scheduled meetings at dawn and conferences at dusk. He required reports on data that hadn't been relevant in years. It was a test, a passive-aggressive gauntlet thrown down, as if he could somehow prove to her through sheer exhaustion that her dream was a folly and her place was here, at his side. Eleanor, for her part, was a bastion of impeccable professionalism. She trained the parade of hopelessly out-of-their-depth candidates HR sent her way with patience she didn't feel. A young man fresh from university who called Alexander mate. A woman with 20 years of experience who seemed terrified of his very presence. None of them were right. None of them could possibly understand the intricate ecosystem of Alexander Thorne. She documented everything in a series of detailed manuals, one for daily operations, one for his personal preferences, the specific brand of ink for his fountain pen, the tailor for his shirts, the name of his dry cleaner, one for managing the board of directors. The manuals were a testament to her care, a parting gift of such immense value that Alexander, upon finding the one labeled personal and preferences on his desk one morning, felt a surge of something dangerously close to panic. He found himself watching her. Not as his employee but as a person. He noticed the way she hummed a soft tune under her breath when she was concentrating, a habit he'd been oblivious to for years. He saw the small framed photograph on her desk of a crumbling stone archway in a Scottish glen, a picture he'd never bothered to ask about. He saw the light in her eyes when she was on the phone with the university, a light that was never present when she was coordinating his multi-million-pound mergers. The emptiness he had felt on that first day began to morph into a sharp, specific ache. It wasn't the loss of an employee. It was the impending loss of Eleanor. Her kindness, her quiet strength, her unwavering competence. The way she could calm his temper with a single reasoned sentence. The way her presence in the outer office was a constant, calming hum in the background of his chaotic life. The breaking point came during a brutal negotiation with a German conglomerate. The video call was a disaster. The connection was poor, the translators were lagging, and the head of the conglomerate, Herr Schmidt, was being deliberately obtuse. Alexander's frustration was a palpable force, his replies becoming shorter, his tone bordering on rude. Eleanor, who had been silently observing, slipped a note onto his desk. It was written in her neat, looping script. He's prideful. Appeal to his legacy. Mention the project in Dresden his father started. Alexander read the note, his anger momentarily stalled by sheer surprise. How did she know that? He had mentioned it in passing, a single comment in a meeting weeks ago. She had not only remembered, she had stored it away as a potential tool. He cleared his throat, forced a more conciliatory tone, and wove the comment about Dresden into his next point. The effect was instantaneous. Herr Schmidt's stern face softened. The negotiation shifted, finding a new, more productive rhythm. 20 minutes later, the deal was salvaged. When the call ended, Alexander sat in the sudden silence, staring at the blank screen. He felt stripped bare. For years he had taken full credit for his success, his brilliance, his strategic mind. He had seen Eleanor as a facilitator, a tool. He now saw, with horrifying clarity, that she had been his partner. The architect of his success, working quietly in the shadows while he stood in the spotlight. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough. She appeared at the doorway, her expression neutral. "Yes, Mr. Thorne?" He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her posture, the faint shadows under her eyes from the long hours he had imposed. He saw the woman, not the assistant. "How did you know? About Dresden?" A small, sad smile touched her lips. "You mentioned it during the preliminary briefing on the 15th of last month. I did some supplementary research on Herr Schmidt. It seemed relevant. Relevant. It was the understatement of the century. It was the difference between a failed deal and a triumphant one." "I see," he said softly. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, a gesture he'd never offered her before. "Please. Sit." She hesitated for a moment, then complied, sitting gracefully on the edge of the leather chair. "This architecture," he began, fumbling for words, a sensation he despised. "Tell me about it. Why this? Why now?" And so she told him. She spoke of growing up with a grandfather who was a stonemason, of spending her childhood summers exploring the ruins of castles and abbeys across the UK. She spoke of the beauty in weathered stone, the stories held in a single carved gargoyle, the importance of preserving history not as a museum piece, but as a living, breathing part of a community. Her voice, usually so measured and professional, was filled with a passion he had never heard before. It animated her, lit her from within. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, executive assistant. She was Eleanor Vance, future guardian of forgotten places. And Alexander Thorne, for the first time in his adult life, felt utterly and completely insignificant. The final week arrived. A replacement had been found, a perfectly competent woman named Sarah who was eager and sharp, but who would never, Alexander knew, remember the name of his mother's gardener to have a birthday gift delivered. The office was filled with cardboard boxes containing the detritus of Eleanor's 5-year tenure. On her last day, the team had arranged a small farewell drinks gathering at a posh wine bar downstairs. There were speeches, a generous gift voucher, and awkward hugs from colleagues. Alexander made a brief appearance, delivered a stiff, corporate-approved speech thanking Eleanor for her dedicated service, and left after 10 minutes, the sight of her smiling and laughing with people from accounting feeling like a physical blow. He retreated to his empty office. It was silent. The manual sat on his desk, a cruel reminder of the system that was about to vanish, leaving only the man. He poured himself a finger of Macallan whiskey, the amber liquid doing nothing to warm the cold dread settling in his bones. He looked around the room. The sharp angles felt hostile now. The modern art seemed garish and soulless. This office, this empire he had built, felt like a gilded cage. And the one person who made it feel like a home was walking out of the door forever. His eyes fell on the small, framed photograph she had left behind on her now bare desk. The one of the Scottish stone arch. She had told him it was a place called the Hermit's Rest, a forgotten chapel on the Isle of Skye she'd visited as a teenager. It was her touchstone, the place she pictured when the stress became too much. A crazy, impulsive, utterly uncharacteristic idea began to form in his mind. It was a terrible idea. It was unprofessional, borderline stalkerish, and went against every rational fiber of his being. But the emptiness was no longer a vague feeling. It was a chasm. And he was standing on the edge, watching the only bridge he had to the other side walk away. He grabbed his coat and his keys. Downstairs the party was winding down. Eleanor was saying her final goodbyes, a mixture of sadness and exhilarating freedom swirling inside her. She stepped out into the cool London evening, taking a deep breath of the city air. It was over. She was free. A familiar black Bentley pulled up to the curb beside her. The window slid down silently, revealing Alexander in the driver's seat. Her heart stuttered. "Mr. Thorne? Is everything all right?" "Get in," he said, his voice tight. I'm sorry?" "Please, Eleanor. Get in the car." It was the please that did it. He never said please. Bewildered, and against her better judgment, she opened the passenger door and slid into the familiar, luxurious interior. The scent of his cologne, of leather and clean, crisp air, filled her senses. He didn't drive off immediately. He just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I have spent the last 5 years building an empire," he began, his voice low and intense. I have amassed a fortune. I command respect and in some quarters fear. I believed I was the architect of my own destiny. He finally turned to look at her, and the raw, unvarnished emotion in his eyes stole the breath from her lungs. But I was wrong. You were the architect, Eleanor. You built the structures that held it all together. You managed the chaos. You saw me. The real me. And I was too blind, too arrogant to see you. Eleanor sat in stunned silence. This was not the Alexander Thorne she knew. When you handed me that letter, he continued, you weren't just resigning from a job. You were demolishing my world. And I've been standing in the rubble for 4 weeks, realizing I have no idea how to rebuild it without you. Alexander, she whispered, using his first name for the first time. I can't ask you to stay, he said, his gaze piercing hers. I saw the light in your eyes when you spoke about those old stones. I would never be the man who extinguished that light. But I can't let you go without you knowing that what I feel isn't about losing an assistant. It's about losing you. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, flat box, tied with a simple ribbon. He handed it to her. With trembling fingers, she untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not a piece of jewelry but an old brass key. It was heavy, ornate, and looked centuries old. Tied to it was a small tag with coordinates written on it. What is this? She asked, completely lost. It's a key, he said, a faint, desperate smile touching his lips. To the Hermit's Rest. The one in your photograph. I bought it. Eleanor's jaw dropped. You bought it? A ruined chapel? On the Isle of Skye. The landowner was reluctant, but everyone has a price, he said, with a shadow of his old arrogance. Then his expression softened again. It's not a bribe. It's not an attempt to tie you to me. It's a contribution. To your dream. A place for you to start. To practice your conservation. To do what you love. He was giving her a ruin. The most extravagant, insane, and profoundly romantic gift anyone had ever given her. It was a gesture that acknowledged not who she had been to him, but who she was destined to be. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the image of the key. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Say that maybe once you're settled in Edinburgh, you'll let me come and see it. Not as your boss. But as a man who was a fool for 5 years and is only just realizing what was right in front of him. Eleanor looked from the key in her hand to the man beside her. The powerful, controlled, infuriating man who was now laying his heart bare in a way she had never imagined possible. The world she had been so desperate to leave suddenly seemed to contain a possibility she had never dared to dream of. She closed her fingers around the cold, solid metal of the key. It felt like a promise. Like a new foundation. Okay, she said softly, a real, genuine smile finally breaking through her tears. Okay, Alexander. I'll consider it. And for the first time since she had placed that envelope on his desk, the emptiness inside him didn't feel quite so vast. 1 year later. The wind on the Isle of Skye carried the scent of salt and peat and cold, clean earth. It whipped around the stone walls of the small, partially restored chapel, whistling through the gaps where new mortar met ancient rock. Scaffolding clung to the eastern wall, and a large tarpaulin was stretched over what would one day be a new roof. Eleanor, her cheeks flushed from the cold and her hands tucked into warm work gloves, was carefully cleaning moss from an intricate stone carving above the doorway. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she wore sturdy boots and worn jeans, a world away from the silk blazers of her former life. The sound of a car engine broke the serene silence. A rugged Land Rover, not a Bentley, navigated the rough track leading to the chapel and came to a stop. Alexander got out. He was dressed in dark jeans and a thick, practical sweater, his city shoes replaced by sturdy boots. He looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him, the perpetual tension gone from his shoulders. He walked towards her, holding 2 steaming thermos cups. I come bearing gifts. Coffee. Black, 1 sugar. She laughed, the sound echoing happily off the old stones. My hero. He handed her a cup, his fingers brushing against hers, a simple contact that still sent a jolt of electricity through them both. He looked up at the chapel, at the painstaking work she had accomplished. It's incredible, Eleanor, he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. You're incredible. For the past year they had built something new. Slowly, carefully, and on a completely different foundation. He had kept his distance at first, giving her space to begin her studies and her project. Their interactions had started with emails. Him sending her articles on Scottish conservation techniques, her sending him progress photos. Then came weekend visits, where he would trade his suits for sweaters and simply help. He'd held ladders, mixed mortar, and listened as she explained the history of pointed arches and barrel vaults. He learned to listen, not to command. He had delegated most of his day-to-day operations at Thorne Investments, focusing only on the most critical deals. The emptiness in his London office was still there, but it was no longer a chasm. It was just a room. His life had expanded to include this windswept island, this ambitious project, and this remarkable woman. "The south wall is next," she said, sipping her coffee. "It's the most unstable part. It's going to be a challenge." Alexander smiled, a real easy smile that reached his stormy eyes. "I've never been afraid of a challenge." He looked at her, his expression turning serious, vulnerable. "Especially when it's a future worth building." Eleanor reached out and took his free hand, lacing her fingers with his. The key to the chapel was on a chain around her neck, a constant reminder of the day everything changed. The day he saw her and she, in turn, saw the man he could be. "Neither have I," she said softly, leaning into his solid strength as they looked together at the structure they were saving, the tangible symbol of the new life they were building, stone by careful stone. It was no longer the hermit's rest. It was the architecture of them.